All right. Well, welcome everyone to what is now the 14th Sliver? Where did Sliver come from? SLiTHEr, hosted by Ionic Viper. It's our first one of a new year, and somewhat appropriate today, a day marking many new things happening in the United States. And something new we're going to do in Slithers this year is take a moment at the start for just a quick DEI moment to reflect on things. And I'm the first one that gets to do this, so I guess it's up to me what to do. And what I'm going to reflect on is, yes, Adam, I did win. Reflect on this community and how it has grown and developed to try and include lots of different people. And I think today is a perfect representation of that. We've got students kind of leading our discussion. But if you go back through the history of Viper and look at the earliest learning objects, they were posted by a very narrow group of people, the people who got the site up and running and were in charge of it. And now we've grown to Discord, where people are active, people are coming to these slithers. Just a really awesome how the community is pulled together through this pandemic and grown, and people are finding new and different ways to contribute. The people in charge of SLiTHEr right now is actually more people are not part of the Viper Leadership Council than are, which is just great. So this is something we're going to be continuing to do, reflect on as we move forward. We've got a schedule for Slithers for the spring, and a lot of them are very closely tied to DEI issues. Our next SLiTHEr coming up in about 2 weeks by Abby O'Connor and Benny Chan from the College of New Jersey is very focused on diversity in inorganic chemistry and things they've done at TCNJ to promote that. So with that, let me take a moment to introduce our two speakers who are going to give us a short presentation, and then we'll open the floor to questions as we go. Our first speaker is going to be Reilly Gwinn, who is one of my students here at Lafayette College. She's a senior. And our other speaker is going to be Sydney Towell from Harvey Mudd College. She's also a senior. And they're going to tell us, what it's been like for the past 9 months, well, almost a year now, going through this pandemic and the experiences they've had. I hope it's a very open and frank discussion. Feel free to put questions in the chat as we go. And I'll lead us in discussion once they're done with their presentations, but I've yapped enough. Reilly, take it away.
Sorry, I was muted. Hi, my name's Reilly. I'm a senior at Lafayette College. I just have a short presentation to show you guys, so I'm going to share that right now. Okay, so I just was here to talk about student life during COVID-19 and my experience with it. So for me being a junior when everything first started and then coming into my senior year, I just want to talk about the progression of like my classes, my research, and then applying to graduate school and everything that included. So to start, I just wanted to briefly introduce where I was in my research before being sent home because of the pandemic and how it's kind of evolved. So I've been working under Dr. Notaro since my sophomore year at Lafayette. So I got I got some experience in the lab under a senior thesis student my sophomore year working with the catalysts we use. And then the summer after that, I started working on my own more. And in my junior year, I was finally on my own project, or basically working more so on my own. So I just wanted to show briefly what I work with in Dr. Notaro's lab. And so we're an inorganic or organometallic lab, and we work with catalytic systemes. So I briefly just put up a picture of the catalysts I work with. So we work with 1,1' bisphosphenoferrocene ligands, which is everything to the left of the gold atoms in this picture. And we use a few different metals in the lab, but I work specifically with gold catalysts. So this is just an example of the backbone of or what the catalyst structure would generally look like. And we could change these R groups to you kind of manipulate the steric and electronic properties of these catalysts, and that's what we study in our systems. And we always use this gold compound with sodium barf to make it active in our reactions. So I had been working with these catalysts for about 2 years, and in my junior year, I started working on a project to make substituted furans. So I'm going to show you that on this slide. I use an electron donor. I use pyridine and oxide. And our initial reaction for this project was I would react it with 2 equivalents of phenylacetylene in the presence of the gold catalyst, sodium barf, and I would stir it for 2 hours at 60 degrees in an oil bath with toluene as the solvent, and we would get these dye-substituted furans. So I started this in probably the last 2 or 3 weeks of the summer of 2019, and then started collecting initial data throughout fall 2019 and then the spring of 2020 up until March. So we were at like a relatively new point in the project when we ended up having to be sent home for COVID. And this is the thesis project that I've continued with. So that's where I was when the pandemic started. And so now I'm just going to shift gears slightly and just start talking about my experience as a student working from spring 2020. So in the spring of 2020, because I'm a biochemistry major, I'm sorry, I might have forgot to say that, but the courses I was taking, that's one of our heaviest semesters at Lafayette College. So I was taking experimental biochemistry, which was a 6-hour lab course per week. And we had like a 2-hour-ish lecture to be introduced to the labs each week. And it was a really awesome class, but it was a lot of hands-on experience. So up until March, I was spending a lot of time doing hands-on experiments that I wouldn't have seen in my research lab. And I was also taking advanced topics in biochemistry, physical chemistry too, which is like a quantum mechanics class kind of at our school. And then I had one elective course, which was like a fun religion course. And that semester, I was also involved with doing my research with Dr. Notaro. I was a chemistry lab TA, which is one of the best jobs on campus. It's very fun because you get to interact with all the other students and try to convince them to like chemistry. And then I do like mentor group. I have like a mentor group of freshmen. It's a partner program at our school. So I was working with 10 to 15 freshmen to kind of guide them through their courses. So everything was kind of normal up until March. And we got an email saying our spring break was going to be extended by 2 weeks. And we didn't have to worry because we were going to come back. So my family at the time was actually between moving houses at home. So I have an older brother too who's in college. So they rented a house with 2 bedrooms and that was it. So I came home unexpectedly and me and my brother were crammed into like this small room together, both taking online courses and both my parents were working from home. And then about halfway through the second week, I guess, that we were home, we got an email saying that we were not coming back to campus and we couldn't get our stuff until further notice. So half of my belongings are stuck at Lafayette for up until May, which was an interesting experience. It was quite stressful. And when we switched to online, my research like stopped for the time being because we had no plan basically it was kind of unprecedented. We didn't know what we were doing. Okay, sorry about that. So we switched online and all of our labs switched to data analysis, which is just a little bit of a bummer, I know, for everyone in the class because we were really excited to do them. And the data analysis, sometimes there could be like a little bit of a disconnect with exactly what's going on. It took us a little bit longer to understand. And then a lot of my classes had weekly instructional videos because a few students, including myself, I live out in Long Island where there's not a lot of people on our internet, as you can see, is not the greatest. It's a little bit funky all the time. And I was having a lot of trouble, especially with Google Meet. I was having a hard time like getting into my classes and being able to hear the professor for up to like an hour. I was just always disconnected. So that semester was really hard for that reason. And all my extracurricular activities stopped except for I graded one paper as a TA when I came home and I didn't get to talk to the students or anything, which I guess is like a blessing and a curse depending on your situation. Oh, and then for this fall semester, I didn't really do much between the spring ending and the fall starting because I had to get a job at home. So I was working 6 days a week at my friend's father's work, and I was working from 9 to 5. So I had the opportunity to look through some literature and do a little bit of an Excel experience, but I had a really hard time keeping up on it because I was working so much with my family. And then the fall semester it's an online semester for Lafayette because all of our courses were online, but certain students, including my roommate and me, because we had lab work to do or because we had a certain situation at home, we are allowed to come back and live in our off-campus apartment. So I took 3 courses. I took inorganic chemistry with Dr. Notaro online. I did my thesis work in person, so I was able to research. It wasn't quite normal, but I was able to access everything I needed, which was very lucky, so that I could continue my thesis and gather data that I very much needed. And then I had one elective online course. I also helped TA online, which was very interesting because we worked with it was my class was all first years, all the kids I had, and I felt bad, but it was important for us to, I think, be there and help them through it because I think having the students there was helpful as they switched to online. And I had to mentor my group of freshmen, my new group of freshmen online too, which was interesting. And I did tutoring online, which was a fun little break. And most importantly, we had to do our grad school applications. My roommate, I mentioned her, she's also a senior biochemistry major, and she was also applying to grad school. So that was helpful for me because I had someone to rely on and kind of like a support network right at home for that, because it was very confusing and it was very much, I felt thrown into it. But that might be how everyone feels every year. And so applying to grad school during the COVID pandemic was a little bit confusing because I feel like me and my roommate, we were on campus, we had more direct access to speaking to teachers or professors and faculty and getting we felt like the information was more accessible, because I know a few students who were off campus who I was good friends with, like working the lab with me, they felt more overwhelmed with the process, I feel, and they were reaching out a lot to students who were on campus and just trying to keep up and ask questions with us, stay on track. And another thing that is really was always on the forefront of our minds is where's the pandemic going to be when we get into grad school? Like, how is it going to affect the schools that we're choosing? And if we can't visit these schools, how are we going to choose them? So that was kind of what the differences that we saw with applying to graduate school. And lastly, I just want to talk about the perspective plan for spring, which I hope we could stick to. Lafayette's allowing any student willing to return to campus. And I believe this one, I might be a little bit incorrect on this, but from what I understand, we're having weekly testing and we're expected to social distance. We have some strict policies online that we had to sign to, saying that if you don't abide to them, you could face suspension, things like that. So I included this little picture that Lafayette posted from the fall of some students who are on the quad with their masks on, because this is what I would expect to see next semester, probably just if everyone is doing what they're supposed to. And for this semester, there were in-person classes offered, but my only in-person class that's like a real class in nature, would be my analytical chemistry class. We have in-person labs, but I think the way they're doing it, they're looking to do it only in person when necessary, which is an interesting thing. And I'm taking a medicinal chemistry course online, an elective course. And then for thesis, I'm allowed to research in the building, which is going to be very useful. But that was pretty much my whole experience with COVID moving through the last year.
Thanks, Reilly. And we'll turn it over to Sydney.
Okay, great. Let me try and get Zoom to recognize the PowerPoint pulled up. Okay, here we are. So as I was introduced, my name is Sydney Towell. I'm a senior chemistry major at Harvey Mudd College. And today I'm going to be telling you about my own experience as a student during COVID. But before I talk about what I was doing during COVID, wanted to give you a little background of what I did before COVID started. So the summer after my freshman year, I did research in Prof. Johnson's lab, creating these sulfonamide-based ligands, attaching them to titanium and tantalum, and then doing asymmetric catalysis with them. And that work was really great, especially because it ended up giving me the opportunity to present at the ACS meeting in Orlando, and also led to a publication. And so it just that work alone really prepped me a lot for graduate school applications. And I also did an additional research project for a full year in a brand new lab at Harvey Mudd, where I was creating these pegylated anilins. You can see one with just a single polyethylene glycol unit attached to it here. And those were meant for hydrogel cross-linking. So from there, then into into the beginning of my spring of 2020, I guess. Yeah, I was taking inorganic chemistry and the lab, and I was taking both of those classes with Prof. Johnson on the call here. And this is actually a picture of one of the complexes I created in inorganic chemistry lab. Probably one of the last times I was in a lab in person until today. I was also taking advanced analytical chemistry and the lab. I was doing some research, that pegylated aniline work, and also taking some humanities courses. And this is pretty much the typical load that Harvey Mudd junior chemistry majors take. And around the 15th of March, which was a week before my school spring break started, we were told to get off campus. They wanted everyone off campus by the end of the weekend. So we had about 3 or 4 days to pack up all of our stuff and leave campus. And so I packed up 2 carry-on bags or checked bags, flew on a plane home to Pennsylvania, and I have not been on Harvey Mudd's campus since that point. So to close out the spring, my labs, like Reilly's, became solely data analysis based. And this was especially a bummer for me because I felt like a lot of the data analysis we were doing was NMR and IR sort of work. And I'd already done a fair amount of that through my research. And so I felt like the real skills I would have learned in my inorganic and advanced analytical lab would have been doing the lab work, not so much the skills of analyzing bad student NMR data. And also closing out the spring, almost all of the REUs I applied to got back to me and said they were just canceled straight up. I did get rejected from 2 before the rest of them got canceled. Luckily, I did have an internship lined up already, and so I will be talking a little bit about that. And then this is just a picture of my birthday cake because I also celebrated my 21st birthday at home in quarantine. So then over the summer, my internship start date got pushed back a full 3 weeks because they had no idea what to do with us because we were supposed to be in person doing lab work. And during that time, I took the general GRE online. So if you have any questions about that experience, I'm fine answering them, but it was pretty boring. And then once my internship did start, the position was fully online and computational. But it's pretty obvious they weren't prepared to have me do computational work because I only had access to 16 cores to run all my computations, which is just not enough to keep someone that's doing a full-time job occupied. And so I spent a lot of time sitting in front of my computer hoping for runs to finish and knitting. So you can see one of my favorite knitting projects, this hat. So then leading into the fall of 2020, up to a week before classes started, Harvey Mudd said we would be going back. And then LA County said, no, you're not allowed to. And so I was going to continue my hydrogel research project I was doing for my thesis and try and finish up that work and get a publication out. But I realized that project really wouldn't lend itself well to online work. And I decided I would much rather do computational research than just literature review for a whole semester or a whole year. And so I emailed Prof. Johnson and asked, oh my gosh, can I switch my thesis project to work with you? And can we find something computational to do? And I'm so thankful I did that because although I don't enjoy computational chemistry as much as I enjoy research chemistry in the lab, I still think it was a much better experience for me, and it meant I could interact more with chemistry, and I felt like I was learning more and not having to force myself through things like I would have had to if I was just doing literature review. And then also similar to Reilly, I spent a lot of time applying to graduate school in this semester as well. This was my lightest semester ever at Harvey Mudd, actually, and it was one of my hardest ever, just from being fully online and also doing all my graduate school applications. So now leading into 2021, I did get into graduate school. And in fact, both the programs that rejected me in their REUs accepted me for graduate school. So that was kind of a fun little turn of events. But my visits are only online, which is highly unfortunate. And I'm going to be taking thesis again. I'm doing a different computational project. I will be taking biochemistry, and I'm going to be taking a couple humanities courses. And then here's just some quarantine stats. To prove, I guess, I've just been sitting alone in my house all this time. I've read a lot of books and knit a lot of things. But kind of to end off Reilly and I's presentations and start some questions and start some discussion, I wanted to part on a couple questions that have really been on the top of my mind as a student going into the spring of 2021. My first question is, how burned out will I be from another semester online? I can tell you I really limped into the finish of last semester. And so I was talking with some of my friends about things we thought went better in classes and classes we thought worked better. And we found that the classes that set clear expectations and kind of keep consistent schedules were better, because it meant that we could then start trying to keep a consistent schedule even in the online course atmosphere. That's not to say flexibility isn't important, because it obviously is in these circumstances, but just having some semblance of normalcy was really essential. And some of my profs did not give that, and it made it really hard. Also, giving clear feedback to the students and telling them like where they're at in the class was really helpful, because I'm sure a lot of you have dealt with this. Grading's kind of different in a COVID pandemic. And it's hard as a student to tell how you're doing when the professor kind of doesn't even know how you're doing. And so I went into the end of my semester not really knowing what any of my grades in my classes were going to be. And then the other question that's been on the top of my mind is, how am I going to choose a graduate school to live at for the next 5 years if I've never been there before? I mean, a lot of places can look great on paper and online, but I'm just really worried about moving somewhere for 5 years that I've never visited before. So I think I'll turn it back to Dr. Notaro to lead some Q&A here.
Awesome. Thank you, Sydney and Reilly, for sharing with us a little bit. Since you both brought up that second question, essentially, and since we've got a special guest rock star here, if I can put Ian on the spot a little bit, I'm sure that something he's thought of quite a bit is they're looking to fill a class at Minnesota for next fall, and just see what kind of insights he might be able to provide us.
Well, yeah, you should just come to Minnesota. I mean, that's the obvious.
Well played.
No, I mean, it's a really great question, and we've been thinking a lot about it up here, for sure. I think that the best piece of advice that I can give is to try and be really proactive and communicative about these sorts of things. So one of the things that I think students oftentimes tell us is what influenced their decision to go to a place are these kind of off-the-cuff interactions that they have with other students or the faculty when they come on the visits. So you go have lunch with someone and they tell you about what it's like to live in the city or something like that. And that just is missing now, right? But most of us are still really excited to talk about these things. So you just need to be proactive and reach out to student contacts or research group people that you may be interested in working for, and ask them these things. And I think that what you're going to see is that different schools are going to have different levels of infrastructure for this. So, Minnesota, we've been trying really hard to set up like this big ecosystem on Slack, and we published a JChem Ed paper about what we did last year, just so we can have students have connections with the perspectives. Other schools aren't going to have that, but that doesn't mean that they're not good schools to go to. And in those cases, I think that a really good idea would be to reach out to faculty and be like, hey, I'm excited about your program. Do you have any students in your group that would be good for me to talk to? And see if you can set up a Zoom meeting with someone that's kind of early on in their graduate career, and see if you can get their perspective on how they chose to go to that school and what their perspective of the first couple of years in the process have looked like. So. Looks like
Thanks.
Adam has a comment as well.
He did.
Oh, right. So what are your plans for helping incoming grad students who may be severely deficient in lab experience relative to normal? That's a really good one. And so we've been having this discussion a lot because, yeah, you just don't have the same level of experience. Our plan is to make sure that the messaging is clear. So we judge people on the totality of the circumstances. And I think that you want to go into a program where that is made clear to you, right? So like, I think a program that is really student forward is going to say to you, like, look, we know things are different and we're going to approach them differently, right? Sydney, I think you mentioned this a little bit with when you were talking about the classes as well, right? So like having someone actually acknowledge that things are different and then try and talk about how you're going to normalize them is important, right? So we're doing that. And then I think for us, once the students get here, I'm back in lab myself, which doesn't happen as often, to try and help train up our first years who are a little bit behind, basically. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian. Appreciate those insights. Does anyone have any follow-up questions there or any other questions we want to think about addressing? I've got a few, but I don't want to talk too much.
I have one, and I sort of know the answer to this because I've watched my own children go through school. But I guess for both of you, what is it like trying to do? I mean, you learned how to do college for 2 or 3 years, or however, I don't even know. Right? Time is never. And then now you're trying to do college, but you're back at home, presumably in a high school-like environment. Although Reilly, you're in a different house, right? So, what is it like to do college but be at home?
And I assure you, you can be as frank as you want to be here.
It's super weird. I did not have, like, I had a fine high school life. It wasn't bad by any stretch, but I look back at high school, like I'm sure a lot of you do now, and I kind of shudder and I'm like, oh, who was I during high school? And I've just kind of been thrust back into that. And also I moved fully across the country. And so I fell out of contact with a lot of my high school friends and colleagues, and they stayed in contact. And so just even going around my area, I've had so many awkward interactions with people, which have been enhanced from COVID. But yeah, it's just, I mean, it is what it is. And I've been very happy that I have a house with good internet and that sort of thing. But it's really weird talking to my parents about how my day was every day again. And really weird not getting to talk to my friends about how my day was every day.
Yeah, I was at college. I lived with 2 girls who were also my age, but it was still really weird because the semester I was here with my parents, it was weird because I would be in class and they'd be like, can you come downstairs and vacuum? And I'd be like, I'm in class right now. I really can't. And I feel like there is a disconnect there because they were expecting it to be like high school work where it's like, well, you could take a break and do it later. And then when I moved back to the campus, it was kind of a blessing and a curse. A blessing in the way that I had control of my own schedule and no one was interrupting me during class, but a curse in the ways that like I had no idea what to do with myself because I was like, how do I cook for myself? Like, how do like time management gets a little bit weirder too. Like I had to make sure I was like waking up, like being on top of my stuff every day. I dyed my hair bright pink at one point because it was just so boring to be there, because the social distancing rules were like very strict, like as they should have been. But it was very hard to balance like class and like being at home / in a new apartment. It just felt very changing and different every day and hard to learn in that environment.
Ian's got a good question here in the chat for our students about meeting new people and what kind of opportunities you've had, or have you been stuck in your kind of same social circles? So
Yeah, I have been pretty much completely stuck in my social circle. And I know a lot of the freshmen on my college campus, mostly because they've been forced to do this, they've been a lot more social, but I pretty much have had the friends that I talked to a lot more in college, I talk to a lot more now, and the people I was like acquaintances with or not as close friends with, I barely talk to at all now. I have been a tutor of freshman chemistry this last semester. So I talked to some new freshmen, but I mean, I was a tutor to them. I wasn't exactly trying to become their best friend in that experience. So I've been pretty isolated for the most part. I think the best strategy I've seen of the freshmen that have been better at this than I have is just like, go for it. Don't worry about looking stupid. Everyone kind of looks stupid when you're meeting new people, even if it's in person. And that's easier said than done.
Yeah, when I was home, it was really strange because I had moved from where I was in high school, and the only person I was seeing that whole time outside my family was my friend whose dad I worked for, because he worked in the same office, so we were in the same circle. And then coming to campus, I feel like there were a lot of seniors there, but most of us didn't interact with each other. You interacted with your roommates and maybe your neighbor and one other good friend, depending on if it was a testing week or not, depending on one of you guys got randomly selected, because the longer you went without getting randomly selected, the less people I feel like you were willing to just like sit down and have dinner with. And I think I mentioned it, I mentored a group of 10 to 15 freshmen. And I think that, and doing the chemistry TAing was kind of eye-opening, because the freshmen, it was very 50-50 split, where a lot of freshmen felt super alone. And I think I was the only person who talked to them like during in my mentor group, and it like broke my heart, because they said that they were having a really hard time. Like they had a lot of social anxiety about reaching out. And so I tried to kind of force them together, and I gave them a lot of upperclassmen phone numbers. I had them tell me what activities they like to do, and then I would find a senior who's on campus and give them their number and try to have them text, so that when they come back in the spring, hopefully that they've been talking to them and they can join those activities, because that might be a little bit less scary than talking to another freshman who you're going to know for all 4 years. And if you humiliate yourself, they're going to remember for 4 years. So I try to do that. And a lot of the kids in my chemistry course, I feel like half of them were very alone, except for when they came to class and were put in their breakout room with the 5 kids they've seen for the last 3 weeks together. So I think for a lot of people it was isolating in our case, but that was pretty much my 2 cents.
Very good. Other questions? And this can come from the students too. Go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, so I had a quick question. So you were talking a little bit about like that social belonging. So I'm at Cal Poly, we're a PUI, primarily undergraduate school. And that development of like your identity as a scientist is like a real big part of our curriculum. So Sydney, you talked a little bit about like when you felt like you were doing science, right? And it wasn't like processing more NMRs. So how have you felt developing as a scientist over the past year? Like, do you feel like you're more of a scientist? Do you feel like it was on hold? And how might that impact kind of going forward? But also maybe like our first and second year students, right? We're talking about that as our department. These students who are making their way through Gen Chem, like next year, we really want them to feel engaged as scientists. So like that identity with the field, how has that kind of changed over the year?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think I've personally been through a lot of like, am I a scientist? Am I not? When I was applying to graduate school, it was a lot of, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm qualified. I'm pretty sure I'm qualified. Sort of talk to myself. And I definitely, at the beginning of the pandemic, I don't want to say hated, but I was definitely like, I am not a computational chemist. I do not want to do computational chemistry. And then I did it over the summer and was like, okay, it's not that bad. And then I decided, okay, for me, it's better to do computational chemistry than literature review. And from my friends that have been doing literature review, I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's pretty dry. I'm sure as professors, you've done a lot of literature review. And even if you love chemistry with all your heart, it can sometimes be a pain to get through all those papers back to back to back. But I think the biggest thing I've seen in trying to encourage young freshmen in like my TAing to see themselves as a chemist is to try and convince them that when they don't understand it right away, that is what being a scientist is about. And I think that's the best you kind of can do in the online environment, and trying to also, I think with computational chemistry, like when I was talking to freshmen about the computational chemistry research I was doing, I was like, oh yeah, it's not really going super well. We're not getting positive results. All the results we're getting are negative. Seems like computational chemistry just isn't cut out for this. And that would get them more interested. It's like showing them within the chemistry they can do, like where it can be improved and that sort of thing. Because you can't exactly talk about improving how you're going to do your burette titrations online, but you can talk about, okay, well, we can try X, Y, and Z basis set, and what are those going to do? And you don't necessarily need quantum physics classes to understand the basics of that sort of thing. I don't know if that answered. That was kind of rambly, but.
All right. Any other questions?
I just really quickly wanted to say thank you to both Sydney and Reilly for doing this. You're both brave individuals for addressing a bunch of faculty members about this. I have a student trying to hop on my Zoom office hour right now, so I have to go. But thank you so much, because I know I'm at a regional comprehensive Hispanic serving institute, and I know what my students are going through, and to see both of you who are at private PUIs for the most part, it's interesting to see your perspective. And so I really appreciate that. And thank you for letting me be a part of your guys' conversation. So, okay, I got to run.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Thanks, Matt. Understand. Well, let me hop in and ask a little question with a tiny little bit of background here. And Reilly's got some knowledge about this. So I'm in my office right now. I have my futon that students have sat on many, many times. It's been called the therapy couch by some folks, and it's empty. And I also have this nice little corner where the new club baseball uniforms are hanging up unused, and they've been there for a number of months and will continue to be there unused for a couple of months. I miss my students. That's the big take home message, but I haven't pushed too hard on like getting together. We've done some lab group Zooms once in a while. And on some levels, if I have to do another Zoom meeting, I might jump out a window. But on some other levels, I miss you guys a lot. What's too much pushing? Is there too much pushing to try and meet with students?
I think that especially in our lab group, I really like when you push for the Zoom meetings, because a lot of times I feel like right now, especially, people don't want to be on their phones because it could be like a little upsetting, and they try to ignore it and find other hobbies. So like I'll reach out, and like I'm not insecure with the fact that we're like friends. It's like people I've worked with in lab for a year. They're like my closest friends, but they might not answer right away. But if we have a Zoom call, they're going to get on and we're going to talk for like 3 hours obnoxiously about the most random things. And it'll feel like we're on the couch. So I personally think that in like those small groups, pushing like a little bit is good, and just understanding that maybe some weeks someone's having a really bad week and doesn't want to come. But also I think that those type of Zoom meetings, those informal ones, they usually made me feel a lot better. Like even when we had the regular, we do like a ACS cookies meeting sometimes, and we used to do it every Wednesday in our chemistry building. And it was really nice because we had regular ones sporadically throughout like this last semester. And I got to see some of the other chemistry students I haven't seen in forever, like my friend Drew. Like I don't ever really talk to him because he didn't come back to campus, and he's very difficult to get in contact with. So I think that pushing is like good, like setting up a lot of things, because I do think people will attend. I guess just understanding that maybe sometimes they're just going to disappear without a notice is like, I'll just understand that a little bit. But I don't think there's ever been too much pushing for us.
Yeah. At my college, it's actually a little different. They set up like a student advisory committee this semester, and I kind of pushed them to try and have informal, just profs and student hangout Zoom time. And not everyone showed up, not a lot of people showed up, but I always felt so happy just seeing the profs that I don't get to see and seeing the students I don't get to see and being like, oh, they still exist. And they're still doing okay. And even hearing like a sentence about how they're doing. Also, I've had some professors from the graduate schools I've gotten into reach out to me and say, oh, you want to talk about my research, that sort of thing over a Zoom call. And that doesn't feel too pushy at all. I don't know if that's a normal thing or not, because is anything normal this year? But I've really appreciated those profs kind of reaching out and saying like, oh yeah, your application fits really well with my research. Let's talk. And then they'll give me their own student contacts, like from students in their lab. And that just lowers a lot of my stress of emailing a professor I've never talked to and emailing students that I'm worried are busy. It just lowers a lot of that stress level down for me and has made it so much more manageable, I think, to consider different professors and different programs.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Do our students have any questions too? You've got some brains to pick here. At least a few of them are good. And then there's me and Adam.
I posed my two big questions at the end of my talk, so I think I'm set.
Yeah, I think I'm good too. Right now, I'm just my really like only question was like, how do I pick without visiting? But I think that it'll slowly become more clear what I'm supposed to do as we like approach it more. So other than that, I don't really have too many questions off the top of my head.
All right. Did I have another one? My brain allegedly works. I think that's it. I have complete and utter faith in both of you that you're going to make wise decisions, even though they're going to be very different decisions than students have had to make in the past. It's certainly challenging, and I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us a little bit about everything you've had to face. I guess maybe, do you have any kind of sense from students in general, just not yourselves, maybe just your friend group or in general, like, could you sum up the overall campus attitude, where students are in a sentence? That's a big loaded question, a challenging one, but what do you think? What's your read?
Okay, I know I'm laughing right now, but Harvey Mudd is located in Southern California, and there's a lot of students there that get very excited about things, and our administration has not always been the most forthcoming about what's going to happen. If you could tell from the week before school started, we suddenly got pushed online happening. But I think most students I've talked to are just so exhausted. And I'm sure all the professors are too. Everyone's just so exhausted. And that exhaustion goes towards like completing assignments that might have been easy in past years are just not easy. My dad's a prof, and at one point this semester he was like, my students are so lazy this semester. They're just not completing their assignments. And I had to tell him, I was like, I don't think they're lazy. I think they just can't do it this semester because there's so many other things going on. So something to keep in mind, yeah.
I think for Lafayette, it's just slightly different because we're going back. And I feel like there's a little bit of worry in my head because I know that a lot of seniors just feel kind of cheated, not by like the school, but just by the circumstance. And they're very upset. And I think they're tired of being upset. And I think freshmen, maybe because they're a little bit on the younger side too, I don't think maybe they're upset. And I don't know if they grasp the situation at the same level, some of them. So I'm a little bit worried that like it'll be a mess having like 2,000 plus kids in one spot because a lot of people are going to feel a different way. I think you have like a polarization of like, I'm here because I want to get like the best, like I want to be in the best spot for my academics and I'm really afraid. And then other people who are like, I'm tired of school not being normal. Let's try and push normal. So I'm interested in what that's going to look like. But I think that's the only two perspectives I really see. Or then just like people in the middle. I feel like I'm just going to do what Lafayette said and hope for the best. So I think that's kind of what it is at our school. We'll see how the first 2 weeks goes.
Well, I won't lie. The fact that you guys are coming back like a week or two before classes start, that terrifies me. That there are going to be people around with nothing to do. And, our emergency response people have enough to deal with right now. They don't need to be dealing with what that might lead to.
Yeah.
I hope
Yeah,
once everyone's back.
We had a lot of tension kind of between the student population, the faculty, and administration. We're kind of like three different bodies. And that communication was really hard, especially kind of in the spring for the transition. We did the same kind of thing where all of a sudden we were online, but we're on the quarter system. So ours actually just happened between quarters. However, we went from the final day of class being in person to all of our final exams starting Monday morning being online. And then we had an extra week for spring break to convert to spring. But for fall, we did have some return to in-person. The kind of statistics was like somewhere between 10 to 15% of classes had some in-person component at Cal Poly. And yet I think the last number I saw was like 60% of students did move back to town. And a lot of it, right, originally people were saying like, don't move back, don't move back. But I think Reilly, you talked about all of a sudden kind of being thrust back into this family household with, a bunch of people and parents and everyone in 2 rooms and everyone online at the same time. And it's tough, right? It's tough for everyone. I think when you were talking about that, everyone nodded, right? Like I have kindergarten going on downstairs for my daughter and my wife's working downstairs. And I'm just as likely teaching a lecture to be like in the zone teaching organic chemistry as feeling the ground rumble with Spice Girls playing while they're cleaning, right? Like that's a pretty even shot. And it is just hard, right? And losing steam is hard. That was something that came up in faculty evaluations at the end of fall, was like, man, Dr. Haynes really seemed like he lost steam in the last 3 weeks. I'm like, yeah, that's 100% fair. I'm like, apparently it was obvious, but and I talked about that with class too. But yeah, I appreciate you guys coming and kind of chatting, and we're all in it in the same boat, just in very different kind of circumstances, and trying to do different stuff. So thank you.
All right. Well, if nothing else, I am going to end recording just by saying that I forgot to put together the evaluation form that I'm supposed to do. So bad on me. Our next SLiTHEr will be February 4th at 3 p.m. Again, hosted by Abby O'Connor and Benny Chan. They're going to be talking about inclusivity in inorganic courses. So I hope you'll join us, and I am going to end our recording. Thanks for attending.